Hello everybody, we have an interesting one here. This is the Tickliest Tickle Me Elmo. And I was asked if I would adapt this over to Switch Adapted, what the challenges might be. The question was doing a stomach activated toy. And so you press the tummy on here and it works. So I adapted this one. I don't have another one available to make a video with, so we're just going to demonstrate how I got to where I am here by opening this one back up. So let's turn him off. Disconnect the button. I could demonstrate that the button works, but I think the more important aspect here, and it does, but the more important aspect here is how do you get him switched out. This was another challenging one to get opened up. So we're going to turn Elmo over and put him feet down for the moment. When you open up the battery box, Velcro, and you see a battery box, this here paper clip represents how far up stitching was to get to it. And as you try and pull it apart to get into the battery box, you see that it's very, very tight. The stitching is here. It's almost impossible, or it's very difficult to get down to the sides. And on a lot of toys I have found that there's a zip tie that's around it to hold the fabric to the hard body. This one here, they went totally different. I'm going to remove the paper clip so that we can now see how far back. I had to tear the fabric. I had to open up the seam. It was stitched all the way up to there, and I had to open that up. And that was the easy part. It means that we now have to come back to this toy and stitch that up in order to close it up properly. But they made it extremely difficult to get the fur, the casing, off of the body, off the hard body. The switch is in the tummy, so it's on this side. I have to figure out how to get to this side of the back side of the front side of this toy. So in order to do that, I'm going to fold this back a little bit now that I've got some flexibility in the material. Oh, I thought I turned Elmo off. Wait a minute. Let's see if I can get Elmo turned off. So what they did, and I actually had to ruin these. I'll show you what is going on here. We'll do the other side first because those, I figured out how to do it on one side and I left some of these intact. So you see these tabs right here. These tabs. This is a plastic piece that is got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of these tabs that slide into in the box, battery box, these slots. So on this side of the toy, this half has got those 4 tabs that slide into that slot. There's also one way up in here which I actually just cut completely off. I couldn't get to it any other way. And you have to figure out how to get those out. They are stuck down in, just pushed in at the factory. They just push those in. But the slot is so narrow here that it's almost impossible to slide something down, release this tab so that it can slide out. To the effect that, I mean, you can see here, I pulled and prodded and I just literally ripped those out on this side here. If you, and what I did was I used a very, very small screwdriver. I slid it down the body side of that slot in order to compress that a little bit, and then I pulled them up, and I was able to get some out like you can see here without destroying them, but most of them were destroyed. So you have to figure, if you're going to do this toy, you have to figure another way of either attaching that with hot glue or something, or my recommendation is to come back and sew this back up and just pull it closed with this and leave the toy alone. It's not going to come apart. But now that we've got the body can be removed, and again, in order for some flexibility, there was one, I'm hoping this shows up on camera, that's this tab right here. You can see some stitching running across a piece of plastic, represents one that was stuffed way up in the top part of the body here, of the hard shell. So I take that off so I get some flexibility to pull this casing down. Okay, so now let's find where the switch is. Having done that, we're going to pull the body out of the toy, or the hard part out of the toy. The first thing we find is we pull the skin, or these are the legs and feet. And I couldn't find any switches in the legs and feet that attached or applied to anything as far as electrical components. So when Elmo says tickle my feet, I don't know how that reacts to the toy. But we're going to go in here and attach to the switch on the belly. So to get there, we have to take the legs off and set them to the side. This is, by the way, the remnants of those parts that I pulled out. So that's garbage. Bring this over here. We're going to take the screw out of here so that we can get set the leg aside so we can get to the other side of the body. When this comes off, you heard a click. This is the mechanical part of the toy that moves, and that has got two flat sides on it that match up to this. This leg was kind of in a little bit of tension on it, so when it popped off, when I took it off, this thing rotated, and that is going to be one of your challenges, is to get that off. I don't want to lose this screw down inside the body and never see it again, so I'm going to take it out. Let's see, I got to get a grip on it. Put it in that parts bucket. We're going to do this to both sides. So the other leg part has to come off. See if I get it all the way out. Yep, almost. There we go. All right, and so you're going to hear that mechanical part's going to twist, and it clicked off and spring-loaded to where it holds the legs in position. So now we can pretty much set the legs, the body parts, and all that aside. And here is the belly. The switch is behind here. This white part, or clear translucent part, is one half of the shell, and the battery pack is on the other side. We're going to reach in, screwdriver, and take this apart. Let's see, I'm going to put those internal screws in there so we don't mix them up. There's, I think, 6. 1, 2, 3, yeah, there's 4 there. Okay. And then here towards the upper part, 5 and 6. When we get these out, so when the top shell comes off, all the components are attached to the red part. So here we are. That comes off nice. Set that out of the way. So now we're looking inside the body. We've got the switch behind that speaker. That speaker can be picked up and pulled, so you can see it sideways into that receptacle there, that receiver part. So pull it over a little bit and it can be set aside. Now we have visibility of the components inside Elmo for all the electrical parts. I have pulled my cable from the back side. I put a hole, put a knot. Let's see, we got some light on there, and I pulled it up through right by the battery box, and you can see where I've attached to one of those circuit mounted switches there again. And those circuit mounted silicone switches, I was able to solder that on. Let's find out if I can get it off nicely for this view. Let's see, I'm going to pry. Yeah, there we go. I got one side. I'm going to reach all the way across underneath it and gently pull on the other side. We got to be careful with these, because if you break off these, this has two little nubs on it that go through the circuit board. You can see them there. There they are. Oh, you can probably see them better against the red background. And so those go through the circuit board and hold it in place. Inside, you see that dark dot. That is the conductive material that connects onto the switch. So here we've got the circuit board mounted switch, which is those zigzag things. You can see where I soldered onto it the 2 points, or the two sides. And to solder on there, I use my knife and I scratch the surface a little bit to agitate it and loosen it up, because this all has a protective coating on it. We'll call it clear paint for the lack of a better understanding. And so when you scratch that a little bit, it helps to make the soldering stick to it. I then come back and put a little dot of solder at each sides before I put the wires down, so I have a blob to attach to. And I was very careful. I wanted to retain the factory ability of using the switch, so I was very careful to make sure that the center part of that will be contacted by that silicone pad, or not the silicone pad, but the conductive part of the silicone pad, would not be interfered with and would make contact. So I was successful in doing that. So there's the solder point. There's how you put it on. To put these back on, we're going to line that up with the two dots, or the two holes. When you get to this point, you'll see those two holes for putting this back in, and it's lined up. And we're going to use that paper clip. And there is a little space in, if you're careful with it, and your paper clip is really flat on the end so it's not sharp, pokes a hole, it will push those back into place. And so now we've got that back in place. It's not quite straight, but when it's pushed down, it activates. This goes back on. And let's see, I'm going to take that off for a moment. You can see by the extreme that this very top edge right here, this end is what hits that switch. So it pivots on this point and makes contact and pushes that down. So that's lined up. So that's basically how to get the cabling in, how to get the wiring in, and fix up this toy. Putting it back together, put the case back on, lined it up, Let me speak real briefly. I believe that this black thing here, which you'll see through the case, is a infrared sensor or something that might see through the body. I don't know. And another point is I chose this place to put the cable, your remote switch to, because it was out of the way of everything. Nothing, it doesn't interfere with any of the movements of anything. So, all right, we got this back together. That's a consideration you have to do every time you open up a toy and start adapting it, is where do you put your cable so it doesn't interfere. I like that spot personally. Set this down so I can put both hands on it and line these screws back up while you look at the back of my hand. These little electric screwdrivers are great. So once you've got it opened up, and boy, it was difficult to figure out how to do that. You're prying on it. To get this opened up, I worked on it for about an hour because I was hoping to salvage all the connections and put it back together exactly like it was, and it was frustrating, and I realized that there was no way I was going to be able to put those back in, or at least not all of them. So you kind of think about that when you're deciding maybe to do this toy or not. So back in, I'm not going to activate this toy without having it closed up, because nothing really happens. There's the movement of the head a little bit, but nothing happens that's going on here. So we now need to get those legs back and put them back on. Now I had mentioned that there's a position that these legs have to be in. This is not going to show up on camera. I'm sure it's not going to show up on camera. That you can see the two flat sides to that hole, I think. And then there's the two flat sides to, is this focusing on the, there's two flat sides to that black pin that sits out there. And so this has to go on in the right fashion. I found that to be extremely difficult to do by myself because there's too much going on holding this out of the way. So a helper may be very handy on this toy. I think, let's see if I can get successful at rotating that towards the direction that the leg is. Oh, I think I got it. I did. All right. And I'm going to get that screw back in there right now. Let's see if I'm lucky on the other side. So again, this one needs to be rotated clockwise in order to match up with the part that's on the leg that it's going to go into. And I've extended that about as far clockwise, holding it with my, okay, success, two out of two. I guess I learned something there. And we'll put the screw back into there to hold it in place. Okay. And re-pull the body around. Refit it back in here. Okay. So here's where you now stitch this part up. I question whether I would want to put these parts back in The ones that are salvaged could go back in, but I'm not going to do it so that I don't have to struggle with it if there's going to be another demonstration or reason to open it up. Stitch that back up at the bottom, and Elmo's ready to use. Now let's show the activation with Elmo. Let's turn Elmo back on. And activate him. He's going to move. And there is that effect. Elmo is happy, happy, happy Elmo. All right. Thanks for watching. So it is doable. You just need to struggle to get into there. I'm going to close this up. I would stitch this up again sew it back together for regular use, but I'm not sure that I would go in and do all those other things to the body because it's not like it's going to fall apart. Okay? So there we go. There's the Tickliest Tickle Me Elmo. Okay? Thank you, folks. Santa Jerry's Workshop. Wonderful day. Oh, and if you subscribe to my channel, you will get noticed, by the way, every time I post a video on a toy so that you're up to date on things. And if you want to follow this and find out what we're doing, then that would be wonderful. I'd appreciate it. So thank you.